خب سلام به همه. میخوام کتاب Doing psychoanalysis in تهران رو با هم دیگه بخونیم که چاپ MIT پرس هست. این نسخه‌ای که من دارم میخونم نوشته خانم گوهر همایون پور هستش و یک مقدمه‌ای هم آقای عباس کیارستمی براش نوشته. من میخوام در واقع از خوندنم ریکورد کنم، به خاطر اینکه حوصله ندارم که یه بار بخونم بعد خلاصه کنم. منتها هدفی که اینو برداشتم اینه که من خیلی مطمئن نیستم که روان درمانی های غیر دارویی توی ایران و مثلا شرایطی که در کشور جهان سوم هستش به اندازه اون چیزی که در واقع توی کشورهای توسعه یافته در وجود داره مؤثر باشه. و در واقع پیش خودم فکر میکنم خب اگر حالا یه نفر مثلا ترومای کودکی داشته باشه یا به هر دلیلی افسردگی یا اضطراب داشته باشه، یعنی در واقع نوروز داشته باشه، چقدر واقعا میتونه روان درمانی بهش کمک کنه وقتی که همچنان داره توی یه جامعه هارش زندگی میکنه و خب خیلی فرصت ها براش وجود نداره. کتابم برای سال 2012 پابلیش شده. خب شروع کنیم با در واقع مقدمه آقای کیارستمی. گفته که دلیلی که من این کتاب تحت تاثیرم قرار داد این بودش که در واقع گوهر همایون پور همون چیزی رو دنبالش هست با استفاده از سایکوآنالیز که من از طریق در واقع لنز دوربینم جهان اونجوری نگاه میکنم. و وقتی که داشتم این کتاب رو میخوندم لبخند به لبم بود و این شعر که جانا سخن از زبان ما میگویی در واقع به ذهنم میآمد. حقیقت اینه که هیچ کدوم ما جهان رو یک پرسونال اسپیس در نظر نمیگیریم که در اون کوچکترین دیسکوردی ممکنه باعث دیسکانکت بشه. و گفته که هیچ کدوم ما در واقع جهان رو از دریچه لنزهای مختلف نگاه نمی کنیم. یعنی وقتی داریم بقیه رو قضاوت میکنیم همه با یه لنزی که در واقع دیدگاه خودمون هست اون واقع رو میبینیم و سعی میکنیم که در واقع اون واقع رو از طریق ریفلکشن و آنالایزیس یه مفهومی از توش دراریم و ما نهایت سعیمون رو میکنیم که یک پروینشیال ابزرور نباشیم و جهان ما محدود به همسایه های ما، شهر ما یا سرزمین ما نیستش و درد همه جا درد هستش. همونجور که خانم گوهر همایون پور در مورد تجربه سایکوآنالیست توی تهران و مقایسش با یونایتد استیت میگه. برای سالها من سعی میکردم که همین پیام رو برسونم. فیلم های من سعی میکنن که هیومن کاندیشن رو در واقع اکسپرس کنن به جای اینکه در واقع اسپسیفیک کاندیشن ها یا در واقع تجارب لوکالایز از یک گروه خاصی از مردم بگن، یعنی تجارب انسانیه که بین همه مشترک بحث شده. من میدونم که از تجربیاتم چقدر سخت این اگزیستنشیال کاندیشن ها رو اکسپلور کنیم بدون اینکه بخوایم توی در واقع ترپ کلیشه ها بیفتیم. و در نتیجه خب برای خانم همایون پور هم طبیعتاً خیلی باید کار سختی بوده باشه که بخواد این کلیشه ها رو بشکنه و استریوتایپ ها رو در واقع کنار بذاره تا بتونه یه دید واقع‌گرایانه بگه. بعد میگه که امروزه هم مارکت خوبی وجود داره برای فیلم ها و کتاب هایی که ایران و ایرانی ها رو به صورت استریوتیپیکال ببینن و خانم همایون پور به راحتی پاپولاریتی به دست آورده با در واقع نقاشی کردن evocatیو و passionate orientalist caricature of Iranians that would reinforce people's prejudice و میتونستش که در واقع کارش رو به بستسلریست برسونه و مقاومت کردن در مقابل این وسوسه یک نشانه از نوبیلیتی، دیگنیتی، سینسریتی و نشون دهنده ایندیپندنت و اوریجینال مایند ایشون هستش و در واقع این خصوصیات بود که باعث شد من این فوروارد رو بنویسم برای اینکه سینسریتی رو در واقع ارزش بذارم و میگه که به طور خاص برای من فاسینیتینگ بود و همینطور مطمئنم برای بقیه هم خواهد بود که جهان خانم گوهرپور رو نمیدونم گوهر همایونپور رو ببخشید از طریق لغات خودش تجربه کنیم و همینطور در واقع complicated psychoanalytic encounter هاش رو بیشتر بشناسیم. What is apparently the account of her own story involving her relationship with her parents in Tehran put me in touch with my own personal story involving my relationship. At this point, let me assure you in no uncertain terms that I would not recommend this book to those who are still searching for the touristic attractions of my country. Luckily for those people, the production of that kind of literature, films, paintings, and photography is prospering these days. However, Humayunpur's book is an extraordinary work that is recommended for those who consider human pain and suffering as an existential phenomenon. Pain is beyond doubt, pain everywhere. I have never heard of an Eastern or Western cancer or of a radiography that would show the nationality, religion, language, or culture of the patient. This book is a radiographic picture of the human condition in Iran, not a touristic photograph of Iranians. Gouher Humayunpur did not choose the easy way out and remained faithful to the title of the book, Doing Psychoanalysis in Tehran. This is in fact the account of the experience of a psychoanalyst working in today's Tehran, as account that continues to grow on you, gets you to know her as an analyst, surprises you and makes you question your own presuppositions. Imagine how I was pleasantly surprised when I read that the Iranian women in book do not narrate the injustices and the oppressions that they face in our society today, but talk about the international paradoxes, conflicts, and dualities they experienced while coming face to face with their womanhood just like any other woman in the world. I definitely consider Gouher Humayunpur's achievement an uncommon one. In the format of a biographical novel and using psychoanalytic free association, she opens up windows and sheds light onto the darkness of the human soul. She pursues the task elegantly recommended by Freud. Now that it is impossible to see clearly, let us try to shed light upon darkness. For all these reasons, I would like to congratulate Dr. Humayunpur for the freshness and authenticity of her discourse and welcome her to my work. که سال 2011 نوشته. خب من برام سخته هم فارسی بخونم هم انگلیسی بخونم فارسی هم زمان ترجمه کنم، در نتیجه ترجیح میدم انگلیسی بخونم. حالا پریفیس خود خانم گوهر همایونپور. Is psychoanalysis possible in the Islamic Republic of Iran? As the title Doing Psychoanalysis in Tehran implies, what you're about to encounter is an attempt to write in the format of a psychoanalytic session, an ideal psychoanalytic session where both analytic subjects, analyst and analysand, have the courage to face the chaos of their unconscious, to come face to face with the stranger within themselves, and to learn to bear the anxiety of participating in the unknown. The reader will not find chapters, footnotes, or exact references. I have attempted to avoid the defense provided by classification and labeling. Julia Kristeva recounts that, having written many specific papers and books on different topics, she has come to the conclusion over the years that at some level they perform a defensive function. One can authentically face oneself only in the highly intimate process of writing a novel. In the process, one finds oneself far away from the safety provided by a specific structure, the discomfort of the certainties associated with categorizing, and the inevitable anxiety that follows in the absence of any frame of reference. Writing a paper for a scientific journal without in any way intending to detract from the necessity of such endeavors is like a patient coming into a session and verbalizing that he has thought about what to say, how to say, and in what order to say the things that must be communicated to the analyst. It's a thorough. It is as though he still has the illusion that when using the imperfect tool of language, there is such a thing as the possibility of exact communication, and he doesn't realize that all we are capable of doing is miscommunication. It is as though he uses the defense of illusory precision to deal with the anxiety of being an analytic coach. In a good enough analytic environment, the analysand slowly becomes brave enough to let go of his symbolic pieces of paper and specific categories, and his desire to know often prevails over the comfort of staying away from the things that his unconsciousness already knows. Certainly, there always remains the question of how free one's free associations actually are. This I will try to address in the following pages, in which I have attempted to free associate in Tehran. These pages are nothing but my fantasies and my fantasies alone. Not that anyone can get away from doing anything else. Where I once again indulge in the challenge of coming face to face with my own unconscious. In a sense, this is solely a note to myself. I have been practicing psychoanalysis in Tehran for the last 5 years. Meanwhile, I have written a number of papers about my experience as a psychoanalyst in Iran and presented them at international conferences. I have been interviewed by a number of Western radio stations and magazines on the topic and written the book you are reading. My experience of speaking in different venues about doing psychoanalysis in Iran has been interesting. The audience's reaction to my account has been quite curious. I would characterize this reaction as a fascinated rejection, to borrow Julia Kristova's expression. The topic of doing psychoanalysis in Iran conjures up some fascinating fantasies from the start. The listener usually anticipates some juicy, exotic stories. Yet this fascination is accompanied by a rejection suggesting the impossibility of doing psychoanalysis in Iran. I feel that I have almost caused disappointment by presenting case materials that are similar to those of patients in Boston or New York. These reactions could also be characterized as a form of Orientalism, to borrow Edward Said's term. The exotic or oriental other is fascinating for the Westerner, but the gaze is one that makes the other inferior. It's not the same kind of exoticness that is generally attributed to the French. However, without going into the details of States' theoretical position, I would like to add the responsibility of the Orientals themselves in creating Orientalism according to his theory. We have to stop blaming the West for our condition, for our destiny. In fact, if you're reading this book in order to satisfy your Orientalist curiosities, I have to warn you, it will be a disappointing experience. I know it's popular to eroticize the qadr, to use exotic titles such as lipstick, jihad, talk about how Iranian men beat their wives, or eroticize Iranian calligraphy such as Alif, Bes, using exotic names like Shehrazad, Siavash, Muhammad Hussein. I'm not blaming this phenomenon on the other. We do it ourselves. We are attached to our Oriental reflection in the eyes of the other. A French friend recently reminded me that the French are also eroticized in various ways, but I believe there is a difference between being eroticized for creme brulee and being eroticized through the chador. The former is not a manifestation of the master-slave mentality. The French are eroticized for their superiority, while the Orientals are desirable for their inferior delights. I'm not playing the blame game. We do it to ourselves, for there are so many neurotic gains to be had from the process. Change starts within ourselves. We have to give up the pleasure of being looked upon as erotic, exotic, and strange. We have to come face to face with our inevitable ordinaries. Slavoj Žižek, in a recent interview, said that what he admires about Abbas Kiarostami movies is that one does not get an image of daily life in Iran. They are represent universal conflicts. I come from the same school of thought. Recently, I sent a paper, The Coach and the Chador, to a prominent Lacanian psychoanalyst for her comments. She wrote back, "To me, here you offer the sociological lessons to be drawn from the impossibility of practicing psychoanalysis in Iran. It's beautiful investigation of the Iranian making of the self, where the Oedipal complex is played out according to very different parameters than in the West. Everything is upside down. The symbolic order, or rather what replaces it, a rigid structure reminiscent of mechanical solidity superimposed upon the greatest civilization of all time, which went under repression along with their desirous men, is the backdrop for the child of what regulates the all-powerful desire of the mother. This is why the postmodern definition of femininity and body feel to me problematic, since there is no direct indictment of the patriarchal order, since there is none in the Western sense of the term. Anyways, psychoanalysis can't really work in Iran, as it after all a purely Western practice. جالبه. خب پس ایشون هم معتقد بوده که سایکوانالایسیس محصور و در واقع پرکتیس دیگه وسترن ورلد هست و تو ایران نمیشه استفادهش کرد. According to this analyst, psychoanalysis is impossible in Iran, not only because it's a Western practice, but also because Iranians operate within a different symbolic order. In Iran, the symbolic order is upside down. There is no entry into the Oedipus complex for the child, suggesting that the Iranian national psyche is psychotic. Another psychoanalyst at a recent conference in Boston responded to a different paper of mine with, but I do not think that Iranians can free associate. I responded by saying that in my opinion they do nothing but that is their problem. I also sent an early draft of my book to a very famous journalist who had been many times to Tehran, so I knew that she was fascinated by Iran. This is what she wrote back to me. I checked with a friend who runs a publishing company, and he suggested that you pick the most provocative couple of chapters that would appeal to an American public, and email them to him. It shouldn't be psychoanalytic material that a psychoanalyst could write in Manhattan. It should be juicy. I wonder how in the world a psychoanalyst can even function in Iran. I wonder if any Ayatollahs have sought help. جالبه. You should give the chapters a zippier title. On the coach in Iran, for instance, is better zippier. I am curious about how many patients you actually treat in Tehran. Are there any patients outside of Tehran? Do any prisoners get psych treatments? Do you ever worry that Iranian officials might try to find out what your patients are telling you? Have any of your patients been political prisoners? Are the patients more likely to have sexual or political problems? Or do these sometimes converge? Apparently, according to the journalist, there are the only two kinds of problem as Iranians might have. How about you change your title to Going Crazy in Tehran? This is what I mean by the fascinated rejection. Iranians are aliens. These very strange, exotic creatures. Who is this stranger? Why alien? And alien to whom? Alien, البته. According to Deleuze and Guattari, the impossibility of being in your own home provides us with an ontological misunderstanding, the tragedy of identity. Worrying strangeness is a Freudian concept used by Kristeva as one explanation of this tragedy. The fear of the other and the worry of strangeness are both the result of the fear of difference of the other within ourselves. We are scared of what we are, and we are scared of our unleashed desire. Hence, we transfer our fear to the others, to the stranger, to the one who is not us, and to the difference. The other is both the source of our anxiety and the danger which threatens us. The fear that we experience, the strangeness, is more of an international phenomenon than an external one. The worrying strangeness can never compete with the fear of the anxiety of facing our unconsciousness, our femininity, or with the fear of facing death. The worrying strangeness is closely related to the childish fear of the other in the form of death, the other in the form of woman, and the other in the form of our own uncontrollable drives. In short, the fear of the other as the stranger within ourselves. The fight we put up against this is the same fight we put up against our own unconscious, and the only possible Derridian hospitality we could offer would be to accept and welcome these strangers into the fearful territory in which we, the stranger and the self, are both living. According to Kristeva, living with the other is living with the question, am I the other? Or as the French poet Rimbaud puts in, I is an other. Kristeva wonders why we call foreigners aliens, alien, being anything entirely other to the status quo. But an alien is also the scary foreign body in the eponymous movie which prevented us from sleeping for such a long time. What if Kristeva is right and the hidden face of our identity is the alien who lives within us? Facing the other thus becomes comparable to facing the strange identity, the troublesome otherness that Freud introduced to us when he theorized the existence of the unconscious. I cannot deal with you, the alien, just as I cannot deal with the alien inside me. There is something in you that disturbs the unconscious alien within myself. I was interviewed for the Italian psychoanalytic journal Psyche, and although in this case the interviewer was a lot more in touch with the alien within herself and treated psychoanalysis in Iran with a much more open mind than the other examples I have given, there were still certain questions she asked and a certain manner in which she asked them that reinforced the point we have been discussing thus far. She asked, there are various psychoanalytical theories on trauma and how to treat traumatized patients. They all agree on the fact that the past and the present traumatic experiences can be worked through in the interference and the analytical relationship. If this is true, and I hope it is, then psychoanalytic treatment can reduce the suffering arising from traumatic experiences linked to restrictive and destructive familiar and social situations. It's very important to distinguish the cultural from the political in Iran, which does not seem to be the same as in the West, and favor the passage from being subject to one's own story to being the subject of it, which is to say an active agent of one's own story and one's own destiny in a way relatively independent from the environmental, social, and cultural context. Could you comment on this? I answered, of course. If the subject has the desire to work through his or her traumas, this desire should always prevail over the environmental, social, and cultural contingencies. However, we should not forget that subject itself is a cultural artifact aligned with the mood of its liberation, psychoanalysis. To transcend the symbolic order in order to become one's own agent or an autonomous ego is an intriguing fantasy which should operate in Lacan's imaginary register. In your view, has the interest in and curiosity about psychoanalysis as a means of treating mental problems and also its introduction to Iran resembled the transplantation of a foreign body by professionals or intellectuals who have been educated abroad? Or conversely, has it found a fertile ground for its development within the cultural and artistic poetry, miniatures, carpets, traditions, and the spiritual strengths which are, according to the famous Iranian poet Ferdowsi, the expressive means through which Iran has always communicated within the outside world? I answered, it is both. Psychoanalysis was transplanted here from the West, but in quite a special manner. The seed of this Western discovery found a very fertile ground within the culture of Iranian thoughts. Ferdowsi, to whom you referred, can be considered our Sophocles. In him, we see the significance of storytelling, dialogue, and interpersonal relationship ingrained within the Iranian historical tradition. خوب جواب داده. So we brought the seed of psychoanalysis from the West, but in Iran, this seed found itself germinating in and nurtured by various artistic expressions such the ones you have mentioned. For example, every carpet has a story to tell. through its unique and specific design and has been made within the intention of communicating with a specific other. Iranian culture revolves around stories. People here are very much into talking, and so talking cure has found itself taken to the heart of the Iranian national character. I'm not ignoring the importance of cultural difference, yet neither can we ignore the fact that human beings are a lot more similar than they are different, that pain is pain, and whenever we feel differently, we must look for the stranger within. This is the only place we will find an alien, a stranger. I do not need any of the theories outlined above to understand the possibility of doing psychoanalysis in Iran. I am reminded by my patients during every minute of their 50-minute long analytic sessions every single day that we are doing psychoanalysis. What I would like to do is to report on some of these experiences, these co-constructed fantasies of this particular analyst and her patients after her return home to Iran. Upon arriving in Tehran, she isn't the first patient I have seen in Tehran. Last summer, while vacationing in Iran, I worked with a few patients, and it's certainly not the first time that I found myself waiting for a new one. As it is, I cannot understand where the anguish, the nervousness, and the lack of confidence come from. Does it have to do with the referral source, an ego ideal of mine? What if I cannot keep the patient? What if she thinks I'm too young? What if I cannot find the right words in Farsi? What if I do not end up being the brilliant psychoanalyst I have convinced my ego ideal I have become? What maybe it has to do with what I have heard about Mrs. N. I have heard about her brilliance, her straightforwardness. I have also been told that while asking for a referral, she questioned my doctorate in psychoanalysis. What maybe it has to do with being in a new environment and to some extent having become free of some imaginary master signifiers. I have no one to answer to. I can work exactly the way I want, the way I believe. I am free. At least it seemed easier at the time to have the illusion of freedom. 4 years later, I must say that this illusion has been completely destroyed. So what is wrong? What is so very wrong? Do we need master signifiers? What will I do with this freedom, and why is it so terrifying? I think now that I found myself scared and nervous, for who was I if I was not the rebellious psychoanalyst fighting for subjectivity? Now I had been given the subjectivity I had wanted in the form of a doctorate and a certification as an analyst, but my title brought a great deal more upon me than the usual authority accompanied by such degrees. I have moved to Tehran with my degree in my ego ideals suitcase, and now I have an open field, lots of patience, and no one to answer to. I do not need to play any political games, none whatsoever in Tehran. Ironically, this privilege has been given to me in a country that at this moment in history is one of the most politicized countries in the world. A country stigmatized by the world for its violations of human rights, its lack of democracy, its nuclear ambitions, and its lack of freedom of speech. In Tehran, in one of the most controversial countries in the world, I have gotten closer to my rights as a psychoanalyst than I could have done elsewhere. Paradoxically, I have found my place, having been spared the usual politics that recent graduates of any psychoanalytic institute have to endure in the rest of the world, and yet I find myself anguished. The patient walks in. She's tall, well-dressed, not beautiful, even though one cannot help noticing the remaining traces of what was once upon a time a striking woman. Right away, I noticed there is a certain air about her. She walks gracefully, firmly, confident, and yet vulnerable. I show her to my office, and my anguish is lifted as soon as I utter the words. What brings you here? The magic of these words, these 4 words which are loaded for me, they immediately put me in the analytic position. ببخشید من یه خاطر یادم آمد که میخواستم در واقع به صورت اوپن از مریضای اورژانس شرح حال بگیرم. تو اورژانس بیمارستان شهدا از یه مریضی پرسیدم مشکلتون چیه که آمدید اینجا؟ بعد ناراحت شد، گفتن مشکلی که نداشتم. خب اینجا بیمارستان بعدی نیست دیگه. اینجوری They grant me confidence. They hold the many voices and ghosts of analysts past inside them. They are my analytic organ, as Julia Kristeva would say. But in the midst of feeling confident, I am brought down once again, faced with my own castration, when I notice that she is sitting on my chair and I on the couch. How did this happen? Yet I am betrayed by language and I say nothing. She starts telling me, you know, Dr. Hamایون, when I heard about a fresh young psychoanalyst coming to Tehran, I got your number and I came right away, for I need help and I need you to help me. However, I do not want to talk about my emergency problem today. I want to ask you a few questions, but I hear that isn't kosher in psychoanalysis. Listen, I know Lacan and Freud very well. I was analyzed by a Jungian psychoanalyst years back. I am a famous painter. I live in Paris for years and I hated every minute of it. I find French people rough. Eventually, I fell into a depression 7 years ago and it broke me inside. She starts crying and wonders, how come you make me cry so easily, little girl? Having faced my silence to her question, she responds to her own question with 2 dreams. She tells me that her recurring dream consists of being told that she has to get all her stuff together because of some form of disaster. She has to pack mostly her clothes to join everybody else on an enormous ship that is leaving the city, and yet each time she is unable to fully dress herself. Anxiety takes over. In every episode of the dream, leaving the dreamer unable to find the last article of clothing, such as a pair of shoes, her blouse, her jacket, etc., in order to be able to join the departing ship. As I listen to Miss N, I notice her hand, her professional organ as a painter. Her fingers are all deformed, her skin is dry and irritated, both her arms have a strange twist to them, and I know right away that this is a severe case of arthritis. I find myself drifting away from her into my own psychic stage. I wonder if this is a clue as to why I found myself on the couch earlier when she cut off my analytic organ by situating herself on my chair. Arthritis has shown her no mercy. It has slowly taken over her professional organs and she is not capable of easily handing me the things that has been so abruptly and severely taken away from her. That would just not be fair, it seems, in the psychic world of Miss N. She goes on, the second dream I have is about my mother. You know, this dream often perplexes me because in real life my mother was the typical Iranian mother who would sacrifice everything for her children. Yet in the dream I am a little girl trying to call upon her, trying to get her attention. I cry and shout and nothing works, for she is very beautifully dressed, dancing to superb music and preoccupied with a great number of men. She does not even turn to look at me. There is something about this dream that sends shivers down my spine. I desperately want to come up with something to say to Miss N, but the words do not make themselves available to me. I find myself hating her mother, thinking in silence, I guess she was not so self-sacrificing after all. If the language of your unconscious is reminding you of not having been hurt by her, and yet consciously you have managed to remember her as a saint, the image of a dream mother whom every child desires. But it seems that Miss N cannot flee from the horrifying image of a very different kind of mother. The mother who does not respond to you, no matter how desperately you try to make her. The mother who refuses to put you under her gaze. The mother of every child's nightmare. It seems that Miss N's days are accompanied by the mother of her dreams, while she cannot escape the mother of her nightmares at night. The last dream brings with it a shift in the dynamic Miss N and I share. She's the little girl now, and I have restored my analytic position even though she's still sitting on my chair. I ask her to elaborate on her dreams, and she says, most days I shout so much at people around me that I lose my voice, and that is not even what tortures me the most. The worst is the torment that accompanies me, joined by severe guilt after my hysterical episodes. Why do I shout so much? I want to shout now. I right away think of her shouting in her dream to get her mother's attention, to have her notice her, hear her, look at her. I inquire if there is anything she's saying that I'm not hearing right now. She starts to cry again. I have an idea that my last intervention has brought us closer, and the idea is strengthened by what follows. Miss N reports the only time I have ever been on an analytic couch was when I lived in Paris. I met a famous psychoanalyst in a cafe. We sent the usual signals men and women send each other, and we ended up in his office on his couch making very passionate love. She has a mischievous smile as she tells me about her escapade in Paris, to which I respond, so you have been very well analyzed. This exchange feels very intimate. I have been afraid that things were moving too fast. Now I wonder, too fast for whom? Is my concern really for Miss N, or are things moving too fast for me? Are the intimacy and the sexual tone of our last conversation making me, the analyst, feel uncomfortable? As my mind is spinning, playing with these various ideas, she tells me that our time is up. This again feels like an attempt to challenge my analytic position, perhaps to show me who has control over these sessions. I try to take the analytic's chair back, so to speak, and bring up the issues of the fee. I have a mischievous smile now. There's nothing like bringing up the fee to clarify any misunderstanding about who is in charge and who is going to be charged. My communication to her is, you may take my chair, you may be the one ending the session, but let me remind you who is going to pay whom. You are here to see me, you are here to get something from me that you believe I have, and for that you will have to pay me. Freud understood the loaded symbolization of money when he wrote, money matters will be treated by cultured people in the same manner as sexual matters, with the same inconsistency, prudishness, and hypocrisy. While I'm still very proud of the recent reclaiming of my chair, she's tough and does not give up the match easily. She throws me another ball and says, would you like cash? Many psychoanalysts have a fetish about good old hard cash. I'm not going to lose. I cannot afford to lose the game right now. I'm too attached to my position as an analyst to let her win. I have lost too many of my imaginary positions recently. I'm not going to give up this one without a fight. As it is, I reply, pay me with whatever fetish you have. She smiles a smile that in my opinion feels like a warning, a foreshadowing our session to come, but a smile that also has some degree of satisfaction in it. I imagine that she feels I could be a worthy opponent. As she gets up from my chair and heads for the door, she says, wipe your sweat away. You did well. I can't believe it. Wipe your sweat away. You did well. I am reminded of Milan Kundera, how I abuse him as a master. Everyone knows that it is not only slaves who are abused by masters. I have internalized him as the novelist who mastered the art of the novel. I had a dream about him last night. I remember it in black and white. Surely I have made it black and white because as beautiful as colors can be, I cannot help but associate a certain kind of banality with them, and the director of my unconscious refuses to assign any form of banality to Kundera. But what is wrong with banality? In my opinion, everything I despite it in others, I am incapable of forgiving it in myself. Hell is not the other, but banality. It's not the Marcus de Sade who should be burned, but banality. خب بنالیتی هم که میشه ابتذال و در واقع فکر کنم اشاره خانم نویسنده هم به سبکی تحمل ناپذیر هستی The Lightness of Being هستش. In an interview about her novel The Samurai, Julia Kristeva wisely elaborates, none of the characters in The Samurai could say that hell is other people, for hell is inside of us. Neither can they ask the question, should we burn Sade, یعنی همون مارکی دو ساد, for Sade is burning inside of us. خب یک توضیح کوتاه در مورد جولیا کریستوا بگم که فیلسوف، منتقد ادبی، روانکاو، فمینیست و رمان نویس بلغاری فرانسوی است و کتاب‌های ترجمه شده زیادی هم تو فارسی داره، از جمله خودم را می سفرم، داستایوسکی یا سیل زبان، علیه افسردگی ملی، ازدواج به مثابه هنر، هانا آرنت زندگی یک روایت است، ملت‌های بدون ملیگرایی، مارسل پروست و ادراک زمان، فردیت اشتراکی، تن بیگانه، در آغاز عشق بود. خب if we share as I do Kristeva's Freudian position, then we can infer this. It's not my very own banality burning inside of me that has paved the way for my deep rejection of banality. That being said, in my opinion, banality remains the fundamental diagnostic criterion for the crisis within our era. Let us go back to my dream and Milan Kundera telling me, I like what you're writing these days. When I get up, I feel that I might as well have dreamt of an ice cream, that this indeed is the wish fulfillment of our dreams. The dream is also a reminder of my narcissist, with the language of my unconscious making the master novelist tell me how much he likes my writing. What you do not know about my intimate love affair with Kundera is that it goes back too many years ago, to when I was 11 years old. That year I read The Unbearable Lightness of Being in Farsi. I read it word by word at least 5 times and had many parts memorized by heart. One of the frequent limitations in the psychoanalytic study of literature is an emphasis on content at the expense of form. This tendency is often accompanied by a pseudo-clinical approach which treats fictional characters as if they were flesh and blood human beings undergoing analysis. Naturally, treating characters as our patient allows us to stay in familiar territory and to avoid issues with which we may be less familiar, such as the unique structure and tradition of literature. Although I find myself in agreement with Berman's general thesis as outlined above, I cannot refrain from attempting the psychoanalysis of the characters in the unbearable lightness of being characters who over the years have come to seem almost more like flesh and blood to me than many of the real people I have analyzed. Borg's elegant turn of phrase elaborates my feeling. A tiger comes to mind. The twilight here exalts the vast and busy library and seems to set the bookshelf back in gloom, innocent, ruthless, blood-stained, sleek. It wanders through its forest and its day, printing a track along the muddy banks of sluggish streams whose name it does not know. In its world there are no names or past or time to come, only the vivid now, and make its way across wide distances, sniffing the braided labyrinth of smells, and in the wind picking the smell of dawn and a tantalizing scent of grazing deer among the bamboos. Slanting strips eye gleams the tiger's stripes and scents the bony frame under the splendid quivering cover of skin. Curving oceans and the planet's waste keeps us apart in vain. From here in a house far off in South America I dream of you, track you, O tiger of the gang's backs. It strikes me now as evening fills my soul that the tiger addressed in my poem is a shadowy beast, a tiger of symbols and scraps picked up at random out of books, a string of labored troops that have no life, and not the fated tiger, the deadly jewel that under sun or stars or changing moon goes on in Bengal or Sumatra, fulfilling its rounds of love and indolence and death. To the tiger of symbols I hold opposed, the one that's real, the one whose blood runs hot, and it cuts down a herd of buffaloes, and that today, this August 3rd, 1959, throws its shadow on the grass, but by the act of giving it a name, by trying to fix the limits of its world, it becomes a fiction, not a living beast, not a tiger out roaming the wilds of earth. We'll hunt for a third tiger now, but like the others, this one too will be a form of what I dream, a structure of words, and not the flesh and one tiger that beyond all myths paces the earth. I know these things quite well, yet nonetheless some force keeps driving me in the vague, unreasonable and ancient quest, and I go on pursuing through the hours another tiger, the beast not found in verse. While we should be very wary of sacrificing form for content, can we really find a more genuine tiger than the one described in Borg's verse? Is a real flesh and blood tiger really any more vivid, striking, exciting, terrifying and authentic than the one made out of Borg's imagination? خب فقط یه چیز هم که بگم، این در واقع شعر که حالا من تلفظ انگلیسی اسم نویسنده رو مطمئن نیستم، همون خورخه لوئیس بورخسه که خودمون میگیم دیگه. To those who say that characters in a novel do not have their own unconscious but are only fragments of the unconscious of their author. I say I know these things quite well, and yet nonetheless some force keeps driving me in this vague, unreasonable, and ancient quest, and I go on pursuing through the hours another tiger, the beast not found in verse. Kundra in general and the unbearable lightness of being in particular are for me the specific essence of what literature is about. No contemporary author has mastered the art of the novel as the writer of the work has himself. Freud's long essay on the psychoanalysis of the German novelist Wilhelm Jensen's story Gradiva infuriated the writer, who did not want the characters he had created to be exposed or psychopathologized. I fear that Kundra would share Jensen's feelings, so it is with sincere apologies to the author of The Unbearable Lightness of Being that I start the psychoanalysis of its characters. These are characters who have over the years become my own version of themselves with the theater of my mind. Since it's only possible for me to analyze my own versions, since within whatever we write, it's only possible to reveal parts of our own unconscious and no more, since the author is dead and long live the text, since it's only these various and limited levels of construction and interpretation that are possible, I plead for my apology to be accepted. خب یه چیزی که برام اینجا عجیبه گفته که since the author is dead، در حالی که میلان کندرا 20 همین ماه یعنی هولوش 6-7 روز پیش اگه اشتباه نکنم توی فرانسه فوت کرده. نمیدونم چرا این اینجور گفته. As I was saying, when I first read Kundra, I was very young and I remember being overwhelmed with such joyful sensations. I like to believe it was the same sort of joyfulness Nabokov experienced while hunting for butterflies. I was certainly shaken by the language of the book. I began to love the characters. As I wondered about their choices, I would find myself in conversation with them. Sabina and her hats aroused my curiosity, but it was Teresa's fierce loyalty and the image of her two big suitcases that has never escaped me. Meanwhile, Thomas did to my young heart what he managed to do to all women. I fell in love with him. France, oh France, how I felt sorry for him. Today I am aware of having assigned to France one of the lowest emotions one can have for another person, to feel pity for him. Yet it was Karenin who brought tears to my eyes, never because I felt sorry for him, but because Karenin represented the antithesis of banality, the real anti-quiche in my opinion. As it was, I cried and cried in the name of Karenin. The Unbearable Lightness of Being was translated into Farsi in the year 1986. At the time, Milan Kundra and the translator were both unknown to the Iranian public, and yet when Bar Hasti hit the bookstore, it was received with such enthusiasm that it shocked everyone involved. Today, Bar Hasti has been republished for the 20th time. This is a record-breaking statistic in Iran. Over the years, the title of the book and reference to it have become part of the intellectual discourse of the Iranian public. The Unbearable Lightness of Being has certainly assumed its weight in Iran. The book starts with the philosophical struggle of lightness versus heaviness. Kundra wonders whether we could find meaning in life if there is no possibility of Nietzsche's concept of eternal return, since we all live life only once and the dress rehearsal for life is life itself. We are continuously faced with the meaninglessness of our lives. The shaky existence of meaning is the key question, and the opposition of lightness and heaviness, the key dichotomy of the unbearable lightness of being. From a psychoanalytic perspective, this is the duality of life and death, lightness versus heaviness, eros and thanatos. This is precisely one of the chief struggles of the human condition. Through the unbearable lightness of being, Kundera familiarizes us with the way each of the characters in the book attempt to find their own balance between lightness and heaviness. He tells us about how these characters struggle in vain to obtain a state that is not totally unbearable. The main protagonist, Thomas, a bright, handsome, and intellectual surgeon in Prague, is a womanizer on the surface, yet it's his curiosity, his desire to know, that takes him on many amorous adventures throughout the book. This, for Kundera, is precisely what differentiates the erotic from the sexual, a distinction which he later claims was totally misunderstood by the American crew who produced the movie version of the book. خب فیلم سبکی تحمل ناپذیر هستی حقیقتا افتضاح هستش و یه چیز اروتیک بی‌معنی تقریبا در آمده. The important theme is brought up time after time in various contexts across the book. It seems that what distinguishes the erotic from the sexual has a direct relationship to the object. In a sense, in the sexual, our libido is pleasure-seeking, while in the erotic it seeks objects, and so in erotic relations we find a less narcissistic subject with more awareness of the other, as opposed to pure sexuality where the individual is absolutely unaware of the subject. Although Thomas makes a point of keeping a clear line between sex and love, he seems to be adept only at having erotic relationships. He keeps his eyes open at all times while making love to a woman in order to be able to watch all the specificity of his lover's way of being. Every object he chooses has a clear relationship to something that is triggered within his unconscious fantasy. In short, Thomas's amorous adventures have an epistemological basis. He is in search of the ontology of every single woman he chooses. Thomas's behavior comes at the high price of unconscious tortures for his wife Teresa, a simple waitress from the countryside who loves him with fierce devotion and loyalty. In Teresa, one finds heaviness very well symbolized by the image of her two big heavy suitcases. Teresa, in some parts of the book, is a woman who has successfully submitted to her castration, the essence of what moves the individual from neurotic misery to common unhappiness, as Freud tells us. Accepting one's castration is what is considered the cure for neurotics in psychoanalysis, but it seems that Teresa, like a specific group of our neurotic women patients, has confused submitting to one's castration with submission to the other, in her case to Thomas, her husband. تحلیل جالبی بود. Upon applying for a photography job, Teresa is asked to take pictures of cactuses as a starting point. To this, she replies that since she does not find cactuses interesting and her husband can financially support her, she does not see any pursuit in taking pictures of cactuses. The conversation goes as follows. The woman said, "But will you be fulfilled sitting at home?" Teresa said, "More fulfilled than taking pictures of cactuses." The woman said, "Even if you take pictures of cactuses, you're leading your life. If you only live for your husband, You have no life of your own. All of a sudden, Teresa felt annoyed. My husband is my life, not cactuses. The woman photographer responded in kind. You mean you think of yourself as happy? Teresa, still annoyed, said, of course I am happy. The woman said, the only kind of woman who can say that is very... She stopped short. Teresa finished it for her. The only kind of woman who can say that is very limited. That's what you meant, isn't it? The woman regained control of herself and said, not limited, anachronistic. You're right, said Teresa wistfully. That's just what my husband says about me. آناکرونیستیک هم که معنیش به همون کرونیسیتی و در واقع زمان اشاره داره. در واقع به معنی کسی هستش که در واقع به درد مثلا یه دوره قبل‌تری میخوره، انگار مثلا دموده باشه یا آپدیت نباشه یا یه همچین جور چیزی. مثلا در واقع منظورش این بوده فقط خانومایی که مربوط امروزی نیستن، مال دوره عقب افتاده هستن، فکر میکنن که شوهرشون بعد تمام زندگیشون باشه و خونه دارن. In this passage we observe a Teresa who has successfully submitted to the reality of her castration, very well elaborated in her lack of desire for the phallus itself, symbolized by the phallic cactuses. She knows she does not possess a cactus and she's okay with that. This enables her to avoid being challenged or upset when she's called passé or old-fashioned. On the contrary, she says, this is just what my husband says about me. It is crystallized in the above passage that submitting to one's castration is in fact a matter of taking the route towards one's real desire and not merely submitting to the other. If she does not find cactuses interesting, she gladly lets her husband support her and allows herself to pursue her real desire. خب راستشو بخواین یکم داره برای من این کتاب حوصله سربر میشه، به خاطر اینکه من بیشتر دوست داشتم در مورد کیسا صحبت کنه، نه اینکه بیاد کتاب Unbearable Lightness of Being رو روانکاوی کنه، چون منم خیلی طرفدار روانکاوی نیستم و به نظرم دیگه خانم نویسندم خیلی داره در واقع داستانو زیادی پروبال میده. به هر حال حالا این قسمت اول بود، چون این فصل طولانی هستش و اصلا اگه یادم باشه کلن کتاب 2 فصل هستش. در نتیجه اینجا من قطع میکنم تا ایشالله در ویدیوی بعدی ادامهش رو بگم. البته اگر که ویدیوی بعدی هم جذاب نباشه شاید کلا کتاب رو ول کردم. ممنون اگه تا اینجا گوش دادین. فعلا خدا نگهدار.